It's the Resistance Report for October 9th, 2017, where we connect the dots, show you context, try to give the events of the day or the preceding few days some larger meaning. Now, tonight there are three big dots. Trump's going rogue on foreign policy, Trump's cruelty toward children, and Trump's war on women. Now, first of all, let's talk about Trump's going rogue on foreign policy. This actually is something that, if you're not worried and concerned about Donald Trump yet, you might want to be, because this could actually mean, if it's not handled correctly, a nuclear holocaust. Now, Trump is taking nobody's advice on North Korea or Iran. Last week, he told his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, here is Rex Tillerson, that Tillerson was wasting his time seeking a diplomatic breakthrough with North Korea. Now, when do you remember ever before a president telling a Secretary of State who has already started an initiative that he is wasting his time, and saying it publicly, tweeting it, or saying it otherwise publicly? Now, over the weekend, Trump wrote on Twitter that only one thing will work when it comes to North Korea. Now, by saying only one thing will work and talking about North Korea, well, that obviously suggests military action. Now, in addition to all of this, sort of putting down Tillerson, telling him he was wasting his time, and saying only one thing is going to work with North Korea, Trump appears about to decertify the Iran nuclear agreement, despite Defense Secretary Jim Mattis's he's not a particularly happy fellow, Jim Mattis. Despite Jim Mattis's and Tillerson's advice to the contrary. So they both said, recertify the agreement, that this is the best thing we can get out of Iran, that if you decertify and Iran is free to go back to making its nuclear weapons, that's a much, much worse situation. And by the way, everybody who has looked at it, including international nuclear inspectors, have said that Iran is actually not resuming its nuclear program. It's living up to the agreement. But Trump isn't paying attention to any of them. He's not even paying attention to his national security advisor. He's openly broken with the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, Republican Senator Bob Corker of Tennessee. In fact, yesterday, Corker charged in an interview that Trump was treating the presidency like a reality show. But that's not all he said. He said that with Trump's reckless threats toward other countries, it could set the United States on the path to World War III. Now, I don't know about you, but when the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, who is a Republican, tells a Republican president out loud in public that his statements, his rash, brash, unscripted, rogue statements could lead to World War III, I get concerned. In fact, Corker also said, Trump, he concerns me. Corker, he would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation. That's Senator Bob Corker. Corker also confirmed that most Senate Republicans share his view that Trump is unhinged and dangerous. I want to give you a further quote. This is from Corker yesterday in an interview with the New York Times. "I know for a fact," he said, "that every single day at the White House, it's a situation of trying to contain him, trying to contain Trump. I know he has hurt in several instances. He's hurt us in relations to negotiations that were underway by tweeting things out." Now this again, this is Republican Senator Bob Corker of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. "Look, except for a few people, the vast majority of our caucus, that is Republicans in the Senate, understands what we're dealing with here. Of course, they understand the volatility that we're dealing with and the tremendous amount of work that it takes by people around him, around Trump, to keep him in the middle of the road." Now, Corker is not talking about middle-of-the-road politics here. He's talking about keeping the President of the United States from veering off the road and taking the country over a cliff. Now, Corker declined to answer when he was asked if he believes Trump is unfit for the presidency. Corker is not running for re-election, so he's free to say things that all congressional Republicans ought to be saying, even those who are up for re-election. But obviously, he is thinking that the president is not fit to be president. Rex Tillerson, what did he say last week? Well, he said that, in fact, he called a news conference to say that he did not actually disparage the president, but didn't deny that he called the president a moron. Republicans in Washington have an obligation to this country to put America before their party. A rogue Trump on foreign policy is the most dangerous thing I can think of right now for America and for the world. Which gets us to tonight's text. This is the 25th Amendment to the United States Constitution, Section 4. Now, it's never been invoked, but now may be the time. The 25th Amendment as a whole, let me just say, was put in place in 1967 in the wake of the assassination of John F. Kennedy. It gives the succession procedure if a president dies, resigns, or is unable to discharge the powers and duties of office, even temporarily. The amendment itself, the whole thing, not just Section 4. In fact, Section 4 has never actually been invoked. The rest of it has been used 6 times. 3 times during the Watergate scandal under President Nixon, and 3 times when presidents have undergone various procedures, colonoscopies, whatever. Once involving Ronald Reagan, twice for George W. Bush. But Section 4, this is what I want you to focus on. Whenever the vice president and a majority of the principal officers of the executive departments. Principal officers of the executive departments, historically, that means Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, it means Secretary of the Treasury. These are the and Secretary of Treasury, Defense, and State. Those are the principal officers. Possibly Justice is included as well. When they transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate, that's whatever Republican is temporarily in charge of the Senate at that moment, and the Speaker of the House of Representatives, their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. At that moment, the Vice President immediately assumes the powers and duties of office as acting President. Now, I know some of you think Mike Pence is worse than Donald Trump. I'll tell you, I have to respectfully disagree. A principled conservative, even a principled right-winger, is far less dangerous to this country than a sociopath. Now, as I said, Section 4 has never been invoked because we've never had a situation like this where a dangerous sociopath has been president. Don't just take my word for it or Bob Corker's words for it or even former Director of National Intelligence James R. Clapper. Do you remember? He said, I really question his ability, he's talking about Trump, his fitness to be in this office, and I'm also beginning to wonder about his motivation for it. There are others. There are psychiatrists. Robert J. Lifton, a psychiatrist and a psychoanalyst, and Judith Herman, a professor at Harvard Medical School who has done pioneering research on trauma. They have written that Trump's, and I'm going to quote them, repeated failure to distinguish between reality and fantasy, and his outbursts of rage when his fantasies are contradicted, unquote, suggests that when faced with a crisis, he, quote, will lack the judgment to respond rationally, unquote. We've already seen evidence of this. Lifton and Herman have expanded on their diagnosis in introductory articles to a collection of writings called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. It's edited by Bandy, I think it is, Lee. Bandy Lee is a psychiatrist at the Yale School of Medicine. Other contributors to this volume find that Trump is a sociopath, a malignant narcissist, a hypomaniac suffering from delusional disorder, cognitively impaired. Friends, if there was ever a situation crying out for Section 4 of the 25th Amendment, this is it. Of course, the question is whether Republicans have the backbone. They don't now. But if Trump continues to move in the direction he's going, if he continues to show how unhinged he is, more and more senators are going to speak out, and this may be a policy, a real possibility. Now, let me just say, foreign policy is usually a completely different realm than domestic policy, but Trump has actually melded the two and made both of them equally divisive and dangerous and cruel. For example, consider how Donald Trump is dealing with children. Right now, funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program, which insures nearly 9 million American children, it's called CHIP. 9 million children are insured under the Children's Health Insurance Program. And funding for CHIP ran out. When? It ran out yesterday. What is the Trump administration doing about it? It's doing absolutely nothing. That means that officials at the state level are saying that they'll have to start notifying families that their children will lose coverage if Congress doesn't provide additional funding. And right now, there's a big fight going on in Congress. Why? Because there is no additional funding. The Republicans want to take additional funding for CHIP, which has been there for years. They want to take it out of the Affordable Care Act and also out of Medicaid, of Medicare. So there is a gigantic fight. And what's Trump's position? Trump's 2018 budget already cut funding for the Children's Health Insurance Program. At the same time, he has been pushing huge tax cuts for the rich and for corporations that will add hundreds of billions of dollars to the federal budget deficit. So there we get an example, a vivid example of cruelty to vulnerable kids, while the Trump administration and a lot of Republicans are saying, oh, it's fine, big tax cuts for the rich is fine. Meanwhile, the White House announced yesterday, connecting the dots, that before Trump agrees to any deal for allowing young, undocumented immigrants, known as dreamers, to stay in the United States legally, Congress has to slam shut the border against children fleeing violence in Central America. If a deal isn't reached with Congress in a little over 5 months, tens of thousands of the young dreamers, now these are young people who came here as infants and toddlers and who have known no nation other than the United States, they will begin losing protection from deportation. We're talking about children, friends. Trump wants to exchange the well-being of dreamers for a crackdown on another group of children seeking to escape gang-related violence in Central American countries. Now, you can call me old-fashioned, but I remember an America that tried to be kind. It didn't always manage kindness, but it was never intentionally cruel. My great-grandparents came to this nation as refugees. They had nothing. They were escaping violence abroad. They were welcomed here. They were grateful. They built new lives for themselves. I do not recognize Donald Trump's America. There is no reason for this gratuitous cruelty. These children are not going to take jobs away from Americans. They'll add to our country, as did my great-grandparents. Now, a final dot to connect. Over the weekend, Trump weighed in on the scandal engulfing movie mogul and Democratic fundraiser and funder Harvey Weinstein, who's been accused of multiple examples and by multiple women of sexual harassment, and he was fired just yesterday from his company. What did Trump say about Harvey Weinstein? He said, "I've known Harvey Weinstein a long time. I'm not at all surprised to see it." Remember Trump's bragging on the Access Hollywood tape?
And when you're a star, they let you do it. You can do anything.
Whatever you want.
Grab them by the pussy. You can do anything.
Trump was asked by CNN's Elizabeth Landers how Harvey Weinstein's conduct differed from Trump's own conduct. He responded that the tape, the Hollywood Access tape, was just locker room talk. But at least 15 women have publicly accused Trump of sexual harassment and assault. And People magazine's Natasha Stoynoff has 6 independent witnesses to back up her allegation that Trump, quote, pushed her against a wall, shoved his tongue in her mouth, and told her they were going to have an affair, unquote. Trump is still assaulting women. But now, he's doing it in a different way. For example, his education department has just moved to make it harder for women at universities to prove sexual harassment. Trump's Health and Human Services Department has made it harder for women to get contraceptives. Trump has nominated 32 men and just 1 woman to become U.S. attorneys. Trump's 2018 budget calls for a 93% cut in federal funding for programs that aid survivors of sexual assault and domestic violence. Donald Trump and Harvey Weinstein are both sexual harassers. But Trump is also president of the United States, which makes him far more dangerous to women and to everyone else. Dangerous and also cruel. So here's the bottom line. Let's hope for the 25th Amendment, or impeachment, or a year from now, the Democrats taking over Congress, doing something Republicans have not had the backbone to do, and that is stand up to this bully. And now, your questions. Frank Short, do you really think Mattis, Tillerson, and Kelly are running the country? Frank, they're not. That's the point. Trump is sort of running. I mean, he's mouthing off, and he's in danger of taking the country off a cliff. Mattis and Tillerson and Kelly are trying to keep him within bounds. Frankly, I don't think anybody's running the country. I mean, the major offices of every department are vacant. There are a huge number of appointees that have not been even made. The courts, a lot of stuff is filling the federal courts because there's so many challenges to Trump's attempts to repeal various things that he cannot or should not legally be able to repeal. So basically it's chaos, which itself is dangerous. Mary O'Connell, what did you think about Pence leaving the football game early? Mary, it was a prearranged public relations stunt. In fact, there's evidence. Even the reporters in the reporter pool that were following Pence were told to stick around once Pence was seated because there would be something happening. Now, they were told, in effect, that a plan had been concocted. They didn't know what the plan was. The plan, it turns out, was for Pence to get up and make a big show of his and Trump's rejection of the players, their protest against racial discrimination and against police harassment. That's what this is all about. Donald Trump wants to make it about the flag. This is about free speech. Wendy Banks, why are Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi working with Trump on DACA? Are they going to play right into his trap? Wendy, I don't think so. My impression, I have no inside knowledge of this, my impression is that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer tried to work with Trump, and now that Trump is saying, no, he's not going to even recommend that Congress take up any kind of extension of DACA unless there's money for the wall and unless there is a crackdown on kids coming from Central America. Pelosi and Schumer are furious because Trump told them something completely different. He's now backtracking on what he told them. The fact of the matter is nobody can trust Trump to fulfill anything he says. He has the attention span of a fruit fly. Rosemary Rosenblum, what do you think about creating a new progressive party to break the turmoil in Washington? Rosemary, I'm all in favor of a third party, but what worries me, I don't want that third party to take votes away from the Democratic Party and therefore entrench the Republicans even more. That's the problem, because we live in and we have basically a winner-take-all political system under the Constitution. And so what we have to do is think about, I would much rather we have, and we're already beginning to have, a kind of progressive group inside the Democratic Party pushing the Democratic Party, not to the left. That's what the media is now saying. It's not to the left. The old right-left business is anachronistic. That's not the way we think about politics anymore. It's anti-establishment versus establishment. On the old right, on the Republican old right, basically it's now authoritarian anti-establishment populism. And the alternative is Bernie Sanders type Democratic, small d, anti-establishment populism. That's the issue in the future. That's going to be the big choice in the future. That's where the energy is on both parties. And finally, Ruth Voilette. Ruth, did I pronounce your name correctly? Ruth? Yeah, okay. Is there a way to take nukes away from Trump? Ruth, the only way to take nukes, at first I read your card as Newt. I thought you meant Newt Gingrich. The only way to take nukes away from Trump is to, number one, impeach him, number two, get rid of him under the 25th Amendment, or make sure that he is not reelected in 2020. The president is commander-in-chief, and sadly, unfortunately, we have somebody who now could, in 4.5 minutes, blow up the entire world, and whose character and temperament should never come close to having that kind of responsibility. On that upbeat note, let me thank you for tuning in. I also want to thank Andrew Santana and also Kyle Parker for their enormous help tonight, and we'll see you soon.